Treason, treason, 7 reasons. Coming up next on Deceptions of the Ages News. Hello everybody and welcome to Deceptions of the Ages News. First thing I'd like to say is thank you for subscribing. We've had a lot of subscribers since the channel started and it just seems to keep picking up. So if you haven't subscribed yet, we're putting out a lot of really good information. Now the difference between this channel and all the other channels that you'll see on YouTube is that I have a huge background in history. So if you want to know the historical context of the modern events today, just watch this channel or read my book, Deceptions of the Ages, Mormons, Freemasons, and Extraterrestrials. Okay, so the FISA memo was released last Friday, and there is massive fallout from both sides of what they call the aisle. And if you haven't seen it yet, on Friday, I put out a video that relates Adam Schiff, who was just freaking out about this memo, doing that Damien act. Remember when Damien was going to the church? Well, that was what Adam Schiff was doing. Is he's the head of intelligence in Congress, and he was really just throwing this Damien act around about this memo coming out. And then once it did come out, there was a lot of interesting reactions. But in the smokescreen that has been thrown out since the release of the memo, I'm just going to do a couple things to clear things up for you. Now, the first thing that I want to clear up for you is that this is not the first time this has ever happened. In all societies that they go through different stages, but if you, Rome is probably the best example, but towards the end of Rome, after Julius Caesar established his imperator, and they had a series of emperors after that, before they had a senate. If you want to see a little excerpt from my book, I'll just show you one here. This talks about ancient Rome, and I talk about what I call the Faustian Trade. Here, let's look at an excerpt from my book really quickly. Okay, got it? All right. So now you understand that Rome started out a peaceful kind of society, but because of their conquest, they basically made that Faustian trade, made the deal with the devil. And so when you go around, or I guess I think it was Jesus that said it, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. So we have chosen that path. We have chosen to go out and mess with people and have military go throughout the world. And we've done it so that we can have cheap oil and cheap cars and we can have cheap stuff from China, whereas other countries, this stuff is very expensive, but for the United States, this stuff is very cheap. And so that's why we really like the army to go out and make sure that we get the best deals on everything. So what happened in Rome was the army, which was responsible for keeping order in all of their provinces and therefore keeping their power, sound familiar, became the most powerful entity in Rome, and they basically let people rule at their behest. And the reason that people got to rule was because they promised the most money to the army, and these emperors were called the barracks emperors. And this is what we are in danger of running into today. And what we've seen with our intelligence services and how they have been totally infiltrated by people that are really against us. And I don't know if they've actually been infiltrated. They may have always been that way. But the intelligence services and the FBI, that is, whoever's got charter to spy on us. These people have obviously been infiltrated, okay? So I'm just pointing out right now that not the first time in history that it's happened. Okay, so now let's talk about the FISA memo. But before we talk about it, as I always do, I just want to give you a little bit more of a kind of a general outline of what really happened. Now, we all know that the Clinton Foundation, they had been selling off this uranium, right? So, like a bunch of seventh graders, they realized that they had been caught, right? So what do you do when you're in the seventh grade and you're out at recess or whatever, and the lady's coming over to yell at you for something? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to say, it wasn't me, it was somebody else, right? So they did that old ploy. And so somebody in the Clinton campaign said, look, we're all going to go to jail if Donald Trump gets elected because this uranium deal, this is really serious and this is going to come out. So we've got to do whatever it takes to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't get elected so we don't go to jail. So now we have these guys on the playground, and they're gonna make sure that somebody else takes a fall for what they've been up to. So what they do is they pay $160,000 for this dossier that came from a guy named Christopher Steele. Right? And this dossier was paid for by a law firm, and basically it was completely bogus. So, not only did people like James Comey and Loretta Lynch know that this was completely fake, that it had been paid for by the DNC, they shopped it over to get this FISA warrant from it, right? Now, before we go too much farther, we have to remember, because I don't want to forget to point this out, that this judge who granted the FISA warrant has not allowed his comments, his dialogue between himself and James Comey to be publicized, right? Not only that, but he has not allowed the dialogue that went on, the notes that James Comey took after his meeting with Trump, that he went to Trump and told him that, well, there's this dossier going around, but it's really nothing to worry about, when at the same time he had been over shopping it over to the FISA courts. Okay, so now that they have this dossier, there's two problems with it. Number one is that Steele is a known scumbag, right? He's known as a liar. He's unreliable, which goes on a lot in our intelligence services, if you read any. Okay, so not only has James Comey sold this dossier to the FISA court, that is from a known scumbag. At the same time, the FBI is going to the media and leaking information about Donald Trump suddenly being under investigation. Okay, so this dossier or the FISA warrant was granted, but the FISA warrant lasts for 90 days. So over the course of not 90 days, over the course of 90 days, it expired. Then it had to be renewed. So it was renewed 3 times. And every time it was renewed, it was signed off on by Loretta Lynch, it was signed off on by McCabe, and it was signed off on by Sally Yates. And again, not disclosed to the court that the whole thing was funded by the DNC from a known scumbag and paid for to a law firm that worked for the DNC. All right, so scumbag secret agent Steele, he admits to an assistant attorney general. Now, these guys are supposed to be upholding the law of the United States. Well, this assistant attorney general is named Orr. And super scumbag secret agent Steele tells Orr that he just cannot possibly fathom the idea of Donald Trump getting elected. This is a serious conflict of interest once Orr knows this, because who is Orr? or just happens to be married to a woman who works for Fusion GPS. And what is her job? Her job is to sabotage the Trump administration. So let me throw that back at you. Or is an assistant attorney general for the United States. He's a cop, right? And his wife is employed by a foreign company that wants to sabotage the presidential campaign of an American citizen, right? And at no time does Orr see this, an attorney general who's supposed to know the law, as any kind of conflict of interest. Now, at no time when these FISA memos were being applied for, did anybody disclose the fact that one of the persons in charge of securing this this fake dossier was actually the wife of an assistant attorney general named Orr? All right. So then we get to the meat of the memo, and the first person we see on this memo is some poor guy named Carter Paige, right? Carter Paige, an Annapolis graduate, is suddenly under scrutiny by the FBI. And why is he under scrutiny by the FBI? Because he had some relationships with the Russians. His friend just happens to be on Trump's campaign. His friend's name is George Papadopoulos. And in case you haven't realized it, if you are an American citizen and you have a friend who gets involved in politics, the FBI can suddenly take out a FISA warrant on you, apparently, because all of this stuff was based on a fake document. All right, so now the FBI is hot on the case. They've got counter intel. Counter intel, not intel, but counter intel. Good thing they didn't bring out counter intel, but they've got counter intel and they're on it. And who's on it but nobody but this guy named Peter Strzok, right? Or Strazik, or whatever his name is, skis bag or something. Anyway, but he is a skis bag of all worse, because of the worst dimensions, because he's having an affair with another FBI agent, and they're texting back how much they hate Trump. Now, this is a guy on a counterintelligence investigation. He's investigating an American citizen who just happens to have a friend who's working on the Trump campaign, right? And so these two are going back and forth, demonstrating their bias and how much they just have to get Trump, right? So where is the justice in all of that? Okay, so finally, Deputy Director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe, testifies there would have been no FISA warrant without the phony Steele dossier. Okay, so that is the gist of the FISA memo release, the FISA abuse memo release. Okay, so it should be a fairly open and shut case. I mean, when Richard Nixon was impeached, he was impeached because he brought in the FBI director and asked him to back off of an investigation, right? Now, if I have a video about how they tried to do that to Trump, and this is why Comey and the courts will not release the notes that Comey took after he went to Donald Trump and told him, oh, there's no investigation. Right? Because he wanted Trump in that meeting to tell him to back off. And that would have been a violation. Even though he's not in power, they could have said, oh, he's already abusing his power. So it would have created a whole other narrative. And that's why Comey went out and started writing notes as soon as he left the memo, or he left the meeting, because suddenly he felt that he just had to do that. That is the other thing that is really quite interesting about all of this, because had it happened with Nixon's time, it would have been said and done. But now you have so many people who are so distanced from the truth and from reality, and they are so set upon hate and a fake narrative that if this narrative starts to get washed away, they have nothing left to believe in. So, we see that happening every day as these people realize that they just followed complete scumbags that were selling out our country. So the last point I want to make is that throughout the campaign and now and as it continues into the future, please remember that the people that are talking about this, they talk about everything is Trump. Trump did this. It's Trump's wall. Trump this. Trump is the evil one. But what they don't really want to say is that what they mean is you. They hate you. You elected Donald Trump because you said enough is enough. You started a revolution, and they hate you. So until you understand that, you will never understand why these people on CNN just continue to lie. These politicians, they just continue to lie and hold on to a fake narrative, because the one thing they hate and the one thing they're afraid of, and you've heard it all of your life, they call you Joe Six-Pack, right? You're the soccer moms, and you're not to be taken seriously. And so they've spent years just manipulating you with television and stupid psychological tricks that were all developed at the Pentagon. This is Deceptions of the Ages News. We'll see you next time.